Where did you get the energy you need to do all of the things you did today? You probably said your food, and you'd be right. But where did that food get its energy from? Ultimately, the source of most energy for living things on Earth is the sun. By the end of the slideshow, you should be able to identify the roles different organisms in a food web play and describe how energy is transferred to different trophic levels. Primary producers are those organisms that capture energy from a non-living source and provide that energy to other organisms in a food chain. Most of the time what this means is they capture energy from the sun and produce their own food. This process is called photosynthesis. Photo has to do with light, and synthesis means to make, so photosynthesis is using light to make food. Plants and algae do this for many ecosystems. Then other organisms rely on them for food. However, in harsh environments like the aphotic zone of the ocean or in underwater volcanoes, there's no light for primary producers to use. They use a process called chemosynthesis to produce their own food. Chemosynthesis is the process of using chemicals to produce energy. So photosynthetic plants and algae make their food using energy from the sun, and chemosynthetic bacteria make their food using energy from chemicals. Photosynthetic plants and algae, as well as chemosynthetic bacteria, are considered autotrophs because they make their own food. Producers and autotrophs are synonyms. Consumers rely on other organisms for food. They're called consumers because they must consume or eat their food. Consumers and heterotrophs are also synonyms because they mean organisms that must rely on other organisms for energy and nutrients. Consumers are broken up into categories based on what they consume. This food web shows what different organisms eat. It shows 3 of the 6 categories of consumers. Based on this food web, can you predict what they are based on the picture? There are 6 different categories of consumers. Some consumers eat just plants. They're called herbivores. Herbivores range from caterpillars, which eat leaves, to squirrels that eat nuts and fruits. Plants are primary producers, but not all plant parts are equal. Leaves don't contain very much energy, but the seeds of plants are high in protein and fat, which provide a lot of energy for how small they are. Carnivores kill and eat other animals. Although it's more difficult to catch animals to eat, meat is high in protein because mussels are almost entirely protein. Animals also contain fat, which is high in energy. Omnivores regularly eat both plants and animals. The difference between carnivores and scavengers is how the animal's food dies. Carnivores kill their own food, and scavengers consume the carcasses of animals already dead. Vultures are the most common scavengers, though other animals like owls, raccoons, and hyenas will scavenge if living prey is not available. Decomposers chemically break down organic material. You may see mushrooms growing on logs in the forest. They're chemically breaking down the wood from the fallen tree. Fungus that grows on old food in your fridge is breaking down that old food. This broken down organic material that makes up soil is called detritus. Animals that eat this detritus are called detrivores. Earthworms, shrimps, and snails are examples of detrivores. Essentially, decomposers break down organic material, and detrivores use physical means like chewing to break down dead and decaying plant and animal matter, usually found in the soil or benthic zone. They both work together along with scavengers to recycle the nutrients that are trapped in organisms that die before they're eaten. Producers and consumers are connected to each other through their feeding relationships. A food chain shows how energy is passed between living things in a single chain. In the food chain below, we can see algae are the primary producers, which get their energy from the sun to make their own food. Its energy is then transferred to the flagfish, which eats algae. Largemouth bass are carnivores, which eat flagfish, and the energy continues to get passed to the aquatic bird. Finally, at the top of the food chain is an alligator, which gets its energy and nutrients from the bird that it eats. Relationships between organisms in an ecosystem are never this simple. Largemouth bass don't just eat flagfish. They also eat shrimp. And flagfish are not the only animals to eat algae. Food webs show how all the organisms in an ecosystem are related in their feeding relationships. Several food chains are woven together to create a food web. In this food web, we can see that algae are not the only primary producers. Plants also provide energy by making their own food. Notice also at the bottom of this food web is detritus. This detritus was produced by decomposers breaking down dead and decaying plant material and algae. That's what the dotted lines represent in between the algae and detritus and plants and detritus. We can see from this food web that shrimp and crayfish are detrivores because they're feeding on the broken down bacteria, fungus, and small bits of plant material that make up the detritus. You can also see that these categories of detrivores, herbivores, carnivores, and scavengers are not so clear-cut. Sometimes detrivores like crayfish will eat shrimp and algae. The orange lines in this food web show one particular food chain. But as you can see, you could follow many food chains within this food web. The total amount of living tissue in a system is called biomass. You can see from the biomass pyramid that there are generally many more primary producers than there are herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores. That's because as you move up the pyramid from primary producers to herbivores, energy is lost, so it takes a large amount of primary producers to support a relatively small number of carnivores. Each step in this pyramid is called a trophic level. Primary producers make up the first trophic level. They're able to harness energy from the sun to make food, and they then break down their food to carry out all of the processes necessary to live, like grow and reproduce. In these processes, they use some energy, but a lot of energy is lost to heat. Therefore, if an herbivore were to eat the primary producer, it will only retain about 10% of the energy originally found in that primary producer. As you continue to move up the food chain, or the food pyramid, at each step, 90% of the energy that that animal consumes is either used for their own body processes or is lost as heat. So they only pass 10% of the energy they eat to the next trophic level.